Hello again. Welcome back. This time I want to talk about that essay, The Structure of Araby, and I'm going to try to keep this one short, um, and I think I could do it. Uh, yeah, I want to talk about this essay, how it relates to it, and also I want to talk a little bit just about this essay as an example of literary analysis. Since this is like a more professional one, I know we looked at the Pokemon and stuff like that, but this has a more professional quality to it. Okay, so let me start by maybe picking up with where I left off in the last video. In that, I think I ended by talking about the aspect of like loss of faith or, disenchantment or demystification, however you want to talk about this. And I think one last thing I wanted to say on that was at the end of the story, when clearly, the boy has this experience of losing faith in whatever. We said maybe losing faith in the ideal version of like love that he'd been thinking about. I think another way we could put this is that he kind of loses faith in like conventional gender roles or something like that. That he realizes that the view, like like the medieval kind of view of like the princess in the castle and the knight who goes out and does the quest, that like no longer works, right? Maybe that's what he's losing faith in. Maybe he's losing faith in the probably kind of sexist gender roles that he probably believed in before that, or that we're all kind of raised with. So I just wanted to say that, and then I want to get into this essay. So obviously, this essay was comparing the structure of Araby, right? The kind of organization of it and the different like sections of it to this kind of medieval romance type story. So just like they say here at the end of the first paragraph, and I think this is kind of the thesis, the author says Araby is structured with rigorous position upon a paradigm of medieval romance that the unnamed boy reflects in detail and in general. It goes on. The story as a whole shows Joyce was working with the well-defined structure of a traditional literary genre. So it kind of goes through, and I think that there is an important reason to look at it this way. I don't know if this author ever really fully gets there. Like, I think this essay is largely just saying, like, oh, this is kind of similar to this. Like Joyce is working with, this Araby supposed to be a kind of medieval romance thing. I'm like, okay, sure, like that's interesting enough, right? But why should we really care? And I think there's a way that this argument relates to the things that we've been saying about gender in the story. So I want to try to get there. All right, so a lot of this essay, like I was saying, is kind of syncing up the things that happens into the story to this medieval romance story. So the author tells us that in these stories about knights like, Lancelot and, King Arthur and these types of stories, that I think are mostly from, I don't know, like the 1600s or earlier. He quotes some stuff that seems like Middle English or Old English. He quotes like Chaucer and some stuff. So this is super old stuff that this author's looking at. And he says that in those stories, the kind of general setup is that at the beginning, well, they have the knight's like childhood or whatever, and then the knight like meets the girl, or sees her or whatever, or falls in love with her in whatever way, but not really knowing her, right? Sees her from afar and kind of falls in love with her. And then after that, there's a quest, right? The knight's given the quest either by the woman he's like fallen in love with, or by the king, or whatever. And they gave examples of these, like you have to go and fight a dragon, or kill the ogres, or save some people, or whatever. I was trying to think of like examples of this kind of like medieval romance story that you guys would know. And Shrek came to mind. I think Shrek is a kind of story like this. Even though Shrek, I don't think like is in love with the woman at first, but just like that general setup where he has to go and do the quest, and then at the end, you win the girl or whatever. So the knight accepts the quest, and then the knight does the quest. Would be the third one, is going out and fighting the dragon, leading the army, whatever it is. And then the last step in this is the completion of the quest and the reward. And it says that not always, but usually, once the knight completes the quest, he ends up marrying the woman, and the king is so grateful he lets him be whatever, like a high up, lets him move up in society and become fabulously wealthy and live the rest of his life happily ever after, having been able to marry the woman that he falls in love with at the beginning. So there definitely are some ways that I think Araby syncs up with this. Like the first step of it, of like meeting the girl or falling in love with them or whatever. Obviously, that would be the boy watching under the blinds or whatever and looking at her and things. Accepting the quest, that would be like the conversation they have about the bazaar, where the girl says that she would like to go but she can't, and he says, "I'll bring you something," right? And from there, the quest kind of takes off. And I think there's something to that. I don't think this is too far fetched. And then the doing of the quest would be going to the bazaar, and I like this part where the author compares like dragons or fighting an army or whatever. And for the boy, it's like getting on a train or getting the money from his uncle, getting through the turnstile, these types of things. But then the part where things change here is that the end of the story is supposed to be that the boy, would get the thing from the bazaar, and then him and the girl would live happily ever after, right? And he gets the reward. But this doesn't happen in the story. So this is where there's a kind of significant break from this established structure of the medieval romance type story. Because we get, he goes through the kind of the first three stages, but then when he gets to the last one, it's like a straight cut off, and he just doesn't do it. It's like imagining, like, what if the knight gave up and went home? Like, what if the knight was going to fight the dragon and he got to the castle and he was like, what what am I doing? And he just kind of went home, and he was like, this is silly, because that's kind of what the boy does, right? He gets to where the quest is going to be completed, but then gives up and goes home. So I think that the author's right to say that Araby is similar to this medieval romance in these ways, but I think it's kind of undercutting it, right? It's kind of going against it by maybe subverting it by like undoing the ending and making it not really a happy story. It's kind of like, yeah, what if the knight gave up and went home or was killed by the dragon or something? Like, this doesn't really happen in those stories. So I think this is part where we can kind of see some of like the gender dynamics coming into play. I just wanted to give a quote here. On page 52, the author writes, "In the paradigm of medieval romance with which I began, the quest is successful, but it is important to Araby, to Dubliners, which is the book that Araby is in, and to Joyce that this structural pattern be broken." And I agree that it's important that the pattern be broken here. And they mention the word paralysis, which is a big word we're going to talk about, maybe more so with Evelyn. But I think you can kind of see how these characters kind of just like freeze up, when like the moment where like normally something important or like the climax of the story would happen or something good would happen, that these characters just kind of freeze up or like don't know what to do or give up. Or whatever it is, and that kind of, usually happy ending doesn't really happen in these stories. So I think that we can say, by looking at Araby and its relationship to these kind of medieval romance stories, that something Araby shows us is that this old paradigm, this old structure, no longer works. That if you just take what Lancelot did and try to update that for the modern world, you can't. It doesn't work. There's no dragons left to fight, right? There's no ogres that need to be slaughtered. And where there are armies being led, as I'm going to talk about in another video about like World War One, which is one of the biggest historical events that's kind of creating like the vibe of this time period. Going to World War One is not the glorious way to like improve your station in life if you're the knight. That's not what it is anymore. Now it's trench warfare. Now it's chlorine gas. It's machine guns. It's not beautiful or glorious the way that whatever they tried to make it seem, at least when Lancelot was being a knight and stuff. So I think it's interesting to make this comparison, yeah, because we see how the kind of old way of doing things no longer works. And I think we can extend this to gender. Because I think just like we can say that the old way of a knight moving up in the world, how that no longer works, I think the story is also showing us that those old gender dynamics no longer work. The idea that if there was whatever, that if a younger guy, whatever, fell in love with a beautiful woman or something, or a knight, like in the medieval romances, that if they fell in love with a beautiful woman, they could go and do the quest and then end up with a happy ending. And it's like, well, you can't do that anymore, is kind of what Araby says. And I think that might seem like a bad thing in some ways. Like maybe that seems like, oh, I wish we could still do that. But I don't know. I think that it's kind of presented as like a good thing in certain ways, especially if we think about gender. Because like, what were the gender politics or the gender dynamics of the medieval romance story, of the knight going out and doing the quest and winning the girl, did that sound like a good message about gender or a bad one? I think that it presents an image of, women as passive and unable to do anything outside of the home. Because what does like the princess do in those stories? They just wait in the castle for the knight to go and complete the quest and come back and get them. Uh, so if this like old story about knights and princesses fits in very well with traditional gender roles, then what Joyce is doing by saying, well, this story doesn't work anymore, it no longer applies. I think we can also extend that to the kind of gender dynamics that story like approved of or supported or perpetuated. So like basically by undermining the usual story about the knight and the princess, I think Araby argues like that we leave behind those traditional gender roles, or that they aren't applicable to the modern world, that it's a relic of the past that doesn't work anymore. And that if the boy goes through a loss of faith at the end of the story, if we think about it this way, maybe the thing that he's losing faith of is this kind of vision of romance epitomed by the knight and the princess and the quest, right? By the medieval romance, that he's realizing that the medieval romance is bullshit, right? And again, you could see that as a bad thing. Well, I wish we could go back to that. Or you could see it as a good thing. Well, it was kind of fucked up to begin with. Like maybe we shouldn't have, the king shouldn't have been marrying off his daughter for a quest. or maybe the princess should have been able to go out in the world and figure out who she wanted to marry or whatever. So I think that's kind of how we can connect this to gender here. And in this way, at least in my opinion, you guys could disagree with me, of course, but at least in my opinion, the story then sends kind of a good message about gender. It's this boy going through the experience where he tries to be the knight, he tries to win the girl with the quest, but then realizes that doesn't work anymore, and it shouldn't, because it was dumb to begin with, and the gender roles that it fed into were, harmful and sexist. So yeah, that was just kind of how I thought this article fit in. I do think there were some things about this article that weren't that good as just like an essay. Like there were some things where I thought they focused too much on symbols. Like they tried to say that the scene when the boys talking to the girl, they're talking about the bazaar, and she's like leaning on like a spike or something like that, and they tried to connect that to like a medieval lance, and I'm like, yeah, do we really need to do that? I don't really think that's necessary. So I didn't think that this was like a perfect essay, but I think it did a good job of using like research and outside sources and stuff, even though a lot of them were other stories, I guess. But like using research to make like a specific argument. They do have a specific argument, right? Maybe it's not so much about the message. Maybe we could focus. I would like it a little more if the article went further and said, got into the message about gender that I think the article kind of suggests. But it does, it's clear. It uses a lot of examples from the story, just like we need to, quotes from the story, just like we need to. And it does have a clear argument and thesis. So I think it's good from that point of view. But yes, just wanted to give you my breakdown of that essay. Okay, see you later.